All right, hello and good morning. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Skull Commando Labs, cool to see you in the chat. Thanks for all the advice on Twitter. Uh, hey, popcorn, that's all good. Um, yeah, I'm Andrew Czarnietzki, one of the co-founders of Only by Midnight, and this might not be the most exciting talk in the world, but it's a lot of the content that I wish I would have heard a couple of years ago. So happy to pass that on. Thank you, Indieworldorder for having me. It's a fun convention, and certainly the first convention I've ever attended with a volcano and lava. So that's been a lot of fun. Seen some great projects here, and looking forward to finding some more here later. But alrighty, let's jump into the talk here. So first of all, who am I? So Andrew Czarnietzki, I've got a Bachelor of Industrial Design, started as a designer and grew into the programming and then art side of game design. Kind of the generalist solo development skill set, although I work closely with my wife who does a lot of the writing character stuff. Together we founded Only by Midnight and are just in the final stages of completing Curve Space. Um, like I literally submitted the release candidate builds this morning, and I think we're in good shape. If things go well, we'll be submitting the first package to Dirt here this afternoon, and second one tomorrow. And yeah, huge milestones. That's kind of fun. And then yeah, it'll be really nice when the really nice when those builds are out there. I'm also a co-founder of Serious Labs, and there they do serious video games for kind of industrial training. I've shipped 18 titles, and the biggest is kind of a series of VR crane simulators. So if you ever want to drive a 100-ton construction crane or a 300-ton machine that carries literal buckets of lava, like 100-ton buckets of molten steel, like oh, I know all of that. Really neat stuff there. And on the business side, like we scaled that from a like one person team, like literally myself in my parents' basement, to at one point we had 70 plus people. It shrunk a little bit with COVID, but some really interesting business stories there. Learned from a lot of good mentors along the way. And as fun as all the crane stuff and big industrial stuff is, at some point, like just that creative go make an indie game thing, that bugs sort of bit. And well, it had three legs, and so the little hobby project that I started with Jen turned into something real, and so we ended up founding Only by Midnight. And in the last year, we've raised a little over 325,000 for Only by Midnight through a couple of different programs. So Canadian Media Fund, the Edmonton Screen Industries Office, and NRC IRAP. And we also like I've got experience with grants, but different sort of funding programs, private venture capital, etc., through Serious Labs. So here's a bunch of kind of the lessons that I've learned along the way, particularly the lessons that went into just figuring out this. How do I fund a new indie studio by myself? So what am I going to cover in this talk? So I'll set up. So I'm going to be talking about how grant applications work, sort of the recommended approach that I've worked through before, how to craft an application, do's and don'ts. I've got to kind of fit that title, the main skills needed, and there'll be plenty of room for questions and answers. So I'll try and keep an eye on the Twitch chat here, but if I don't kind of see you because it's on the other screen, at the very least, I do want to have some time at the end to answer some questions. Note that this is from a Canadian public funding perspective in terms of the explicit examples, but there's lots of programs out there. I have a feeling that this will look very closely to other sort of public style programs in other countries. And then even outside of that, the lessons still apply. So public programs tend to be very regimented in terms of the acceptance criteria and the online forms or the like, but the thought process really applies when you're kind of doing the dirty work to build your pitch for a publisher or something like that. I think one of the messages that I'm going to drive through is I'm not going to talk about the creative side. I trust that you as game developers know your product. You know how to talk about the hooks and what makes it fun and all those sort of interesting ones. Like I know I can talk at length about my projects like that. This is all about the, okay, how do you actually communicate all the other business stuff that's going to actually land you the money? And it's not pretty, but it's important. And so hopefully you guys find this interesting. Um, Pardon the Canadianisms. Alrighty. So how an application works, and the key is really you got to understand the funder's purpose. Why are they going to give money? Why are they going to fund? And on the public side, especially, like they have different objectives, and they're usually tied to different sectors. So, for example, you might have a program that's focused around employment skills in a particular sector. Um, are they looking to just keep these sort of jobs and grow these jobs in Canada? That's going to be very different from a program that's all about fostering research and development, fostering prototypes, basically taking some of the risk out of projects to allow like sector stimulation in that regard. There are other programs that are all about marketing, or maybe you have programs about international commercialization, like the Can Export stuff. It's a if you have a product and it's done, and you have a company of enough revenue to show you're established, how you can now take it to a global market. So understand like what the program actually is like supposed to fit, and because that'll also affect who they read. You apply for I'm going to make a cool indie game project to a hardcore industrial R&D program. It's not gonna work. And similar lessons apply on the uh, on the private side. Like if you have a venture firm that's all about doing like hardcore R&D for construction, they're probably not going to like your visual novel project. At the same time, if you have someone who's all about funding um, creative, story-driven content, well, better fit. So the other side, and this is kind of an interesting one that I learned from my mentor in this space, Deanna. It's what happens when your application is submitted? Well, it is going to be read by a human. It is going to be probably reviewed by a couple of humans. Probably a panel, might be an individual, there might be some sort of analyst in there, but it's really, really easy to forget in all these processes that there is someone actually going through this, going to be reviewing it. And I like to be charitable, but at the same time, when you make some sort of presentation or pitch to these guys, you want to be prepared for what happens if the person reading this is the 20th one that they've got, it's the end of day Friday, and they've got a head cold and just want to get home. So consider the human besides this. Consider that you want to make as much of a connection as you can, despite some of these really like the big limitations implied by the process. When will it be reviewed? I can't really speak to that too much, but it always feels to be later than you'd like, so plan lots of time. How do they decide who gets funding? The key word there is decide. This depends a lot on the program. Sometimes there's very clear metrics. It's like we're going to have a table where we score things out and tally up the points. Other times it's based more to the discretion of the individual reviewer or an agent or someone kind of on the ground in that. But the key thing is there's a decision, and it's generally good to understand how that decision is made. When are funds released? Again, usually fairly long after the submission, so just plan for time. And you can take a look, like some programs like the Canadian Media Fund, it's pretty clear when their intake schedules usually are. And so if you apply, like if that's kind of in the May cycle, funding's usually going to happen if you get it kind of around September. And then the can I start before they decide? Oh, be very, very, very careful with this one because a lot of public programs, especially, the no. If you do, you could be in breach or you couldn't close the like there's all sorts of problems with that. Now, some projects actually allow you. The deal that we had with ESIO, they allowed kind of a back payment up to a year. So some programs can, but just be careful. And then on the private side, it's not all that different. The what happens when a application is submitted? Yeah, you got that human in the loop, and there's going to be multiple layers of humans. You're going to have the guy who gets that first thing, and yeah, okay, does this make sense from a publishing side? You got the guys who are going to play it and make their recommendation. They're going to move it up the chain, and eventually you're going to have the execs who decide whether to move on it. So there's humans all along the way. Um, how do they decide? Like same sort of idea. They all have their sort of metrics, whether it's a explicit table where they rate parts of your game versus things, or whether there's more of a gut call. Um, on the publishing side, when are funds released? After you close the deal. And can you start? You can start. You're not going to get the Depends on how you want to do the money. If it's kind of like a advance investment, great. But um, yeah, there's understand kind of some of the nuance around that. So recommended approach when applying. So research the programs, understand the hard requirements, understand the soft objectives. I'll be speaking of those at length here. Understand how your project aligns, plan your proposal, gather data, and then write, review, edit, repeat. So researching researching grants, funding programs. A lot of different programs exist, and they can be in some pretty weird places. And just speaking from like a Western Canada point of view, like I know that in Eastern Canada and Ontario, there's like a big culture around grants and programs and various things. Out here, there's a more of a culture of just go and do it. And so a lot of Canadian, Western Canada companies don't really know about some of these programs, and I'm still learning about, oh, there's a program for this or for that. And some of them can be very niche, but they can be quite useful. So do some research, understand what's out there, understand how they help with your business needs. If you're dealing with hardcore R&D, well, there's programs around R&D. If you're looking to do production funding for a video game, well, the CMF production stream is pretty much aligned to that. If it's commercialization of a prototype in a well, there's programs around that. There's programs around translation and international distribution. There's programs around market research and market access. There's all sorts of different options, and do some research. And the same applies on the private side. There's so many different publishers, so many different streams. Like you gotta do some searching first, and you'll start to see some patterns of what fits and what you want to actually apply for. So the big one here, and this is pretty much my thesis through this whole presentation, is what are funder objectives? So there's the this is really understanding their needs as funders. Yeah, you want to understand the hard requirements. Now the hard requirements they're pretty easy, right? So it's like if you have a program that requires at least three employees, and employees in the literal T4 taxed employees, well, yeah, you better have three employees, right? Like if you have a program that requires $50,000 worth of revenue, you need to have $50,000 worth of revenue. And there might be some nuance. You can does that revenue have to be already visible at a year end, or does that revenue have to be like just you show it's in the bank? But there's going to be these hard requirements. Make sure you fit, because there's no point barking up like a tree if it doesn't matter. All that information should be publicly available, and you can also take a look at previously funded projects, especially on the public government side. See this history of all these previous projects, and you can start to look at patterns there. So if you see that this program is primarily going to companies of some size, yeah, you're probably not going to succeed applying as an individual. Likewise, if this seems to be all about individuals, you're probably not going to succeed as that large company. So there's patterns there. And one of the interesting things on the research side is uh, you can talk to past applicants. We got a lot of insight just talking to people who've worked with CMF before. And also, like, talk to funders. Some of the programs are a little bit more obtuse about this, but for example, the IRAP program, there was a local representative, and I had coffee with him back in the before four when we could have coffee, and like, here's the sort of research we are doing. Does this apply? And yeah, actually, you know what? That can work. And also, this applies to private as well. And so, just talking a little bit about like Nintendo, and that was our first platform that we applied to, only by midnight. And yeah, okay, their needs, you have to have a video game, the hard requirements, right? Like standard video game, right? But what are they also kind of looking for, and how do you sort of approach? In our first pitch, they actually kind of bumped it and said, you know what, it's not quite there. We need some information, but here's an example of one that we really like. And we did some analysis of it. We broke it down, and like, okay, I get what they're looking for. And there's some key things on the hard side and on the soft side. Um, and those soft side ones are key. So on the public piece, like program that's really biased towards skill development and employment in Canada. I would argue CMF is less about making um, games than it is about stimulating this sector. They want to see that team grow, and that's part of it. There's other pieces, but like skill development, employment can be really big. There's other programs where what they really want to see is if we give you this grant, or a year down the road, is that going to lead you to hire more people in full-time jobs, right? Like that can be a big piece. There might be social objectives. CMF is really big about gender parity. They really want to have a team with a balance of men and women. They really want to see more women in this industry. So that can be a really big one. Um, there's sweet spots. If you have a program that generally, like, let's say it goes up to $1 million, but generally they say want to do $200,000. Oh, you apply at 50, it's probably getting to be, they don't want too many 50s because that's going to be a lot of admin overhead. They also probably don't want just $1 million one because that limits their range. So they might have some sweet spots. They might be looking for certain things. Uh, Innovation, if you're looking for something with innovation with a kind of capital I, like really understand what innovation means. And like for IRAP, that really means technical uncertainty, which is a different beast. You might also have, from a funder perspective, they're looking for, say, risk mitigation. Like on the, I'd argue for CMF, but also like Edmonton Screen Industries office, it's a local fund. They want this sector in Edmonton to succeed, which is great. I'm in that sector in Edmonton. I also want to succeed. We're pretty much aligned. They're a relatively small fund, and they want to active in the space. They don't want to lose money. So they're really interested in, are you actually going to be able to complete that project? We really want to see a huge profit, but we don't want to lose money. So how are you going to do that? Is this relatively safe? On the private side, so like with Nintendo, there's a very clear bias to like, are you going to actually be able to pull this thing off on a console with all the little details and rules and technical limitations? Can you actually get through this whole process? Um, you, on the publishing private funding sort of side, like yeah, the risk mitigation, but even more than if you're taking this to like more like investors, how are they going to make money? The venture capitalist guys that I've worked with before, they had a saying, eight banger. So they want to see a plausible path for how they would make an eight times return. Not a guaranteed business plan, but it's like, you know what? You want $1 million, how am I going to make eight? And then the kind of mean one is they sort of round up, how am I going to make 10? And that's not to say they will make 10, but they want to see a plausible path for growth. And then really they tend to be focused more on around like a four times return. But understand what they're looking for and where and how is kind of a really big one. Um, and yeah, ritual sacrifice. I suppose if that was a soft objective, then yeah, understand what they're looking for there. It generally helps. So half of it is understanding what they're looking for and really, really getting that down, understanding the between the lines, right? But then the other path is understanding how your project fits to that. And this is ultimately a persuasive writing exercise. There's a bit of room in some of this sort of stuff. So sometimes you actually need to really look and understand what that alignment is and figure that out. But like I'm just going to talk through a few examples from programs that I've worked with here, but uh, just to give you an idea of showing how you need to understand that alignment. But like if innovation is important, well, innovation is key to certain programs like IRAP. It's one of the big pieces for CMF. You might have venture firms that are really interested in innovation, right? So they don't really care so much about the content as much as the technology or technical uncertainty. Now, that's different from, say, some of the Canadian Media Fund. They, on their innovation side, they might be looking more for innovative story-driven content, so different style of innovation. This is more like IRAP, where it's like technical innovation. We want to see that you've overcome some technical uncertainty. You've advanced the state of the art in some field, and it's like, cool. That's a pretty high bar, and I've seen a lot of people go, well, programming is technical, therefore we're making a game. It's programming, therefore it's innovative. And yeah, no, wrong answer. They do not like that. So you really need to understand how you communicate that your idea is unique. You are moving something forward, and you need to make sure that's clear to both an expert in the field but also layman. Consider the person behind that application who's reading it. And I've seen one application where they got into some fairly heavy technical jargon on the machine learning side, and it was really cool. And ultimately, the feedback was, "Oh, that sounds like all the other card games." And it's just like, "Oh, well, that's really kind of depressing because there's some cool, innovative stuff." As an expert, I'm looking at this going, "Oh, they're doing something really neat here, but the technical jargon completely lost the reviewer, and then there's kind of this regression to this just bare picture they had in their head where it's just like everything else. So beware of the technical jargon. And the one thing I've learned from the innovation, technical, uncertainty guys, oh, they love numbers. They like numbers, and the we can make something X% faster. They like experiments and structure that can be really good. And this kind of goes for everything, but in the innovation one especially, like you want them to come away from this going, oh yeah, they did this and that is new. You want that to be sticky and memorable. So you don't want to go too crazy on the human emotion side when applying for like a hardcore industrial program, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're communicating this idea to the audience that when he goes home and has supper, he's like, oh yeah, that one was pretty cool. Um, the other side, risk mitigation. If risk mitigation is important, and different forms, but like you want to convince them that you're a safe investment. You want to show that your team has experience, that they're going to succeed, that you understand your strengths, that you have plans to address your weaknesses. I've seen this on a few different funding sides where yeah, they don't want to kind of give you money unless that money is actually going to make you succeed and that you're actually going to get around to the finish line. They don't want to really invest in you if you're a high risk thing that's likely to implode. So just kind of going, hey, yeah, we got a bunch of guys together on the internet, and how hard can making this video game thing be? It'll be fine, whatever, people management. Yeah, they don't like that. They want to see that you've got this together, that you'll actually be able to make something out of it. And this goes like triply so on the private side. Your private side is all about risk management. Now, that might be we already have a substantially complete game that is lower risk than a concept. That's one way to mitigate risk. You might have we already have an investor who's brought $1 billion to the table, and we're looking for someone to match it. That's a lot better than, hey, we're looking for $1 million. It may or may not go somewhere, right? The risk mitigation is key, and just I would suggest almost in every application, the risk mitigation part is an element. They want to know how you're going to get through, how you're going to achieve that innovation, how you're going to write that really cool creative story. Um, so always consider that. But if it's one of their prime objectives, yeah, then really make sure you understand how you align. On the other side too, so like if employment and skill development is well, this is where you want to weave a couple of like subtle points into that story. So show that your team is like competent, qualified to mitigate risk, that they'll get through it, but then also show that they still have an opportunity to grow. Show that they've worked together. Show that they complement each other. Show that like if you have anything to talk about on like diversity or parity, like highlight that. And this is actually kind of an important one because I've seen an application where the team is basically too experienced, and the feedback kind of came back and like, these guys don't need us. And that like I'm approaching this as a expert, having done this for many years, and like I this is something new. Despite my expertise, I feel there's room to grow. I feel there's like the next step in my career, in my business partner's career, in career of kind of the team that we hire and build into this, right? So you want to speak to that story. You don't want to kind of come off too arrogant on this. And when you're kind of communicating some of these points, a very easy one is to focus on like value from sort of the shareholder perspective, and that's not what this is all about, especially if it's skill development. Show how your team is going to come out so much better. It's kind of like we got someone, they have this background, and at the end of this, they are going to be an expert in writing. They're going to have leveled up in this field, in this sector, right? That's the message you want to show. You don't want to just kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to make a big return. I'm going to make so much money as the founder of this. They don't like that. In fact, if anything, that's kind of a net negative. They don't really want you to get rich off their dime. They want that team and grow. So if that's the message, make sure you understand it and make sure you understand how to speak to it. And then like don't show too many hats. So when talking about some of the team, especially for small indies, and this applied to like our CMF one, like they don't want to hear it sound like, okay, Andrew, what's his job? Well, he's the programmer and the designer and the sound guy, and he's doing the testing, and he's the CEO, and he's doing this, and he's doing that, and he's doing. It looks terrible, and they freak out. And it's some of that is true. Some of that is it's the reality of doing small startups as individuals. But focus. You show, like in my case, like I'd highlight that, look, I'm doing the programming and like some of the design stuff, but our primary designers here, like that. Beware. You want to consider how the optics of how all of this looks. So, and another one, and this sort of applies to every investment, public and private, they want to know that their investment is transformative. They seriously, like, you need to show how this all fits. You need to demonstrate why you need funding, and you need to demonstrate how that funding lets you achieve your project. And uh, this is important because I've seen applications where, like, if this is $1 million idea and you're asking for 10 grand, they're going to go, it's a drop in the bucket. This is not going to change anything. Why would I spend my money here? There's other opportunities. Then the flip side of that is you can have a, okay, it's a they're asking for money, but they already have this covered, and why would I bother? And I actually saw that tank, a really cool, innovative idea where the they basically position themselves as a, we got this awesome stuff, we have this really cool idea, we have this cool technology. Test test. I'm not sure what's going on there. I heard a beep on my headset. Anyways, they had this really cool project and they presented themselves with a, we've got this funding and that funding, and really tried to show strength on that risk mitigation side earlier, and then the feedback was basically, yeah, you don't need us. So you got to be careful, and they like to see how that money fits. Some have explicit budget pieces and requirements, but like they want to know how, like, are you going to hire people? What does this do to the team? How, where is this money going to be spent? Um, and then yeah, are you asking too much, too little? Take a look at the past funding ones. If the sweet spot is about 200 grand, probably not going to get a million. You're probably not going to get 10. And then the other one is consider special considerations. Like on the IRAP side, games are a bit of a weird fit for them. They tend to be more business to business, industrial, as opposed to business to consumer. Now, a lot of the technical uncertainty R&D side actually applied, and it sort of fit their mandate. And we were basically said, you know what, this is a bit weird for, but if it's below sort of this threshold, then we can make it work discretionary wise. And similarly, like some of these programs, you have kind of special tiers for some stuff. And if you consider, like, they might have more flexibility under like their small budget for stuff that somewhat aligns compared to, like, you're asking for that big project, it had better be like exactly like their flagship brand. So and how do you understand some of that? Talk to the people. So knowing is really half the battle. Like understanding what they're looking for, how you align, getting that Summit story down, like that's huge. That's so much of the effort. But then once you have that, plan your proposal, understand your story, understand how you speak to these requirements, literally write out some of these key points. Um, Also consider like the soft spots that need to be mitigated. Like, okay, I can speak to my project this, I can speak to the team this, but like I'm a little fuzzy over here. Highlighting that's good. You'll need to work on that. And especially for programs with multiple deliverables, like CMF has a whole pile of different documents and pieces they require. Make sure you understand how those key points actually fit, and literally writing this out checklist style is good. And consider coverage and reinforcement. You don't want to be overly redundant, and you don't want to spend 3 pages of your team document talking about how innovative your project is. They're not going to like that. But you also don't want to have a critical key point. Like if one of their objectives is risk mitigation, don't just have one sentence somewhere that speaks about something that mitigates the risk. Because if that person misses it, if it's bad day Friday afternoon, they just want to get out of there. Yeah, that might sink your entire application. So you want to have coverage, avoid being too redundant, and consider bringing in outside help. So this is where like strategy, writing, editing. How I met my mentor Deanna in this space. they're from a local kind of consulting group that supports grant applications, especially. She's got a ton of experience and was really able to help me hone the strategy and how we apply for these applications, how we structure that story, and then on the editing and review. And the first time I got that document back, it felt like one of those English assignments where like this thing's bleeding red from all the highlights and errors and issues, but it got so much better because of her kind of expert editing. Likewise, graphic design and layout and artwork. We're really proud of the art book that went in through our CMF pitch. That was just it's a beautiful piece of work, and I think really helped sell the emotion of the project. That was fairly easy for us because we have a very talented illustrator and graphic designer on our team, so that was a great one. But like I'm thinking, if I was trying to sell a project like that and I didn't have access through the team, it probably would have been advantageous to get some design help. Doesn't have to be a super expensive consultant, but and any bit of help that you can, especially if it's an area you're weak in, because like I'm terrible at graphic design personally. Yeah, it's a consider it. Likewise, accounting, budget. There's a lot of numbers on some of these ones. If you're weak at that, maybe consider bringing in some help for someone who can kind of help speak to that, help you prepare some of that, because there's sort of a baseline. This is a business, and like they want to see tax filings, they want to see your year-end financials, they want to see a budget and cash flow and all these things. And if you don't know how to prepare like a good cash flow document, consider getting help because that you don't want that to take your project. On that accounting side, gather objective data. You want to have you want to get everything in one place. You want to get all the requirements, all the attachments. Just create a template. Get all the pieces there. So if you have to have 7 documents, get your 7 Word document templates. If you have to get financials, business number, all of these sort of pieces, gather them, get them together. If they need a budget, build that budget and make sure it's like objective, complete. Follow the rules. If they require things prorated, like on equipment, do it. And another interesting tidbit, this came from the CMF one, is they require, as kind of a carryover from film, fairly steep insurance. I would argue too steep games, but my personal opinion. But they require fairly steep insurance. Okay, not a problem. Except that kind of insurance gets expensive. And they have a line item in the budget for insurance. So, uh, so what would make sense in the budget? Okay, here's where we're going to put the special insurance that that you're requesting. That's what they're expecting. I've seen a few of my peers kind of go through that, and the feedback is basically, oh, applicant didn't consider insurance, and that's now a black mark against the application, and also going to be a few $1,000 surprise when they if they got funded. Um, the other ones show evidence and traction, like on the number sides, they love, especially on the risk mitigation side, or depending on certain pieces, they like show sales, show revenue, show social media interest, market research, understand your market. That might literally be a requirement in an application, but even if it's not, understanding any of that. There's gathering all of this information is key. And this isn't just on the public side. On the private side, you're going to need to have all of the same sort of thing there. You're going to need in that 1 page publishing pitch, you need to understand, broadly speaking, how your pitch fits into the market. What sort of some of like what are you kind of targeting sales traction wise? Like it's okay to be fluffy and estimate, but at the same time there's a you got to do some due diligence here. And if you have success, if it's a oh well we already have so many wish lists or so many people on following us here or any of these things, those are important. Celebrate those, highlight those. And all takes a surprising amount of time. So don't leave any of this to the last minute because you'll get burned. And this is the part that's the easiest to procrastinate on. And yeah, get it done ahead of time. Seriously. Uh, then the other side of it is yeah, write, review, edit, repeat, and so make the most of the medium. If it's your application has to be through a structured online portal. Yeah, do all your work in Word. Do not actually write in the portal. Yeah, I got signed out after half an hour of writing a really awesome piece in a online forum once, and that sucked. The other one is consider the word counts, consider the requirements, consider the suggestions, all of that stuff. They're trying to tell you what they want to see. So word counts, if you have 5,000 words to articulate why your project is innovative, well, you better come pretty close to 5,000 words. If you put in 500 words, you're too light. You're way too light, and they're going to look at that and go, you're missing something here. Likewise, if they say they want 5 pages and you give them 10, well, they're not going to like that. They might literally stop reading at 5. They might actually just go, yeah, no, these guys can't read instructions, and boot you right there. So don't go over, but don't go under. Uh, they're those counts are really telling you what they're looking for. And similarly, if they're like this document and please show or please consider A, B, and C. Well, consider making those actual like headings. If like under the innovation, they want to see like how this has a legacy for the this industry, how this relates to this, how this relates to that. Yeah, highlight those, use those. All those requirements on what they're looking for are literally telling you what you should have. Nothing, none of that's a suggestion. All of that, use it, do it, highlight it. If you do have the opportunity for sort of a free-form application, CMF is pretty good for this. This certainly applies on like a private side, like to a publisher. Like visuals, fonts, layouts, like make your application memorable. Whoever's going to be reading this, they've gone through so many. That's not to say that you want it to be avant-garde or high cognitive load. You don't want your application for please fund my game to be an interpretive dance that they need to interpret. But at the same time, it's a think about how many Word document template number two that they've seen compared to like just do something with a font. Be a little bit consistent about the graphic design. Like lean into that. If you have art, use art. Make it pretty. Make it memorable. Make it stand out. And uh, the other side, like yeah, make a list of your points. Really understand them. Write them down. Have an actual checklist. And really do that due diligence of like where some of these points like fit. Okay, this is the innovation document. You're focusing on innovation, but if you can, in a couple words, kind of like echo a point that you had into the team side, do it. Don't don't cross the streams too much. Don't spend your innovation document talking about team. But it's the more coverage you can have, the more you can kind of like have these different points like resonate with each other, the better. And then roll up your sleeves and type. And it is a lot of typing. Like this big grant applications can be a lot. I think our ESIO one ended up at somewhere around 80 pages, like full business plan and everything, and then like the EMF one, like depending on the program, but it's like 5-page document here, 2-page document there, 2-page document there, right? Like these are significant undertakings, and unfortunately, um, not just to sit down, write it, and you're done. Review it, get it reviewed. And when you review it, it's not just the usual like grammar, spelling, punctuation, like that's important, but you need to have your work reviewed for these explicit like well, both the hard and the soft requirements. If it's a 3-page document, probably worthwhile making sure that someone actually, oh yeah, this is the one that's supposed to be 3 pages because you don't want to screw that up. That would be really bad. Um, Make sure that like if they require all these little subtle points and some of those points may be kind of buried, make sure you cover them. Make sure someone has verified, oh yeah, you got this piece. Make sure that you have your all your points, like your strategic points, all your everything that you've learned and built into that checklist. Make sure it's there, and not just there, but that someone with fresh eyes reading this can understand it. Because by the time you're done making this thing, you are blind to it. You're going to understand this thing inside and out, but you need to make sure that your mom can read it and go, "Oh, that's what they mean by innovative. Got it." Because if you don't, if you know it's innovative but it doesn't come through in the text, you're screwed. And you cannot do your own work. It's possible. By the time you've created something, at least on a larger application, you are so blind to these things. You need someone with fresh eyes. Now, the same sort of lessons apply on kind of general QA. I'd talk at length about that, but definitely for this one, having you need the writing and the editing kind of split. And it's going to be a process. Revise, edit, review, and keep going. And it takes a while. And because it takes a while, you want to make sure you're able to do that in the right format. Don't do this in the online forms. Yeah, and when you finally do get to putting it into the online forms, paste carefully because you don't want all your hard work to be screwed up that way. And also just be aware. If they ask for file names in a specific way, or only certain formats, or images of only certain sizes, or um, file size limits of that, yeah, stick to it and make sure someone is kind of watching all of that because it's really easy by the end of this to like, okay, I've uploaded everything, and then oh crap, that video was actually 30 megs, and they only want to see stuff that's or it was maybe 30 minutes, and they only want to see 10 minutes tops. Uh-oh. So yeah, you don't want the actual act of applying to sink all the hard work that you've done. Then like on crafting your application itself. So review that guideline, review the objectives. Interesting point on that is if your project is still fluid, so we were kind of crafting our concept for Tragic Kingdom as we were considering applying to CMF. So if the project's still fluid, well, you can tweak your project to align better to the objectives. For example, if you had someone that are looking for something innovative and you see a good way where you could like, well, maybe we could dial up the innovation in this area and do something really cool. Yeah, do it. It's good. But stay honest. Don't just throw bullshit at it. Don't just be like, okay, this is a blockchain, machine learning, jargon, something, something. And because if they smell bullshit, and if there is bullshit, like that's how you both lose that application and you get blacklisted from doing future applications. So you want to stay honest, but if you have the opportunity to tweak the project in the process of applying and do so in a way that like aligns, yeah, do it. Uh, the other one is know how your project stands out. So I've talked at length on the sort of the more businessy sides, but make sure that you understand what's unique about your project, both as a business element, but as that, especially in games, that creative thing, and you'll have to know that. You'll know that like the back of your hand, and then like know how it aligns to the funder's objectives. And at the end of the day, all of this really comes down to you are creating a compelling story within the guidelines you are creating in the format of a 5-page innovation document, a 2-page team document, a X-page business plan, in whatever the format, you are creating a story where you want the person reading that to go, they got all of our objectives. They got all the hard ones, but that's table stakes, and they got all the soft ones. Yeah, this really does align to my what I'm supposed to be looking for, and I don't know, hiring more women in films in Canada or something like that. But you also have or really does advance the state of the art in this sector, and it's compelling. Yeah, I think these guys got a chance, and that's really cool, and I like it, and it's in the format that I'm expecting. That's how you want the reader to come off experiencing your application. So, kind of summarizing all of these. So, the do engage in research, understand the different programs. Do ensure you meet the eligibility requirements. It's not worth it otherwise. Do really understand those soft objectives for the program. Do determine time, your time and resources before starting. Like, for example, CMF, we spent about 6 weeks as a team working on the pitch, which ultimately became the CMF application. This is a lot of time. So don't leave these things to the last minute. Make sure you have time to do it. Consider your opportunity cost. Get external advice. Do get external advice. Consider people like Deanna, CICG. Consider like there are a lot of experts out there who understand programs like this. Talk to them. They can help. Uh, do ensure that your text is consistent. This is an important one, especially as you've gone through working on something over 6 weeks with thousand passes of editing, especially if it's consistency around your points. Make sure that your message is clear and consistent, and if you change it halfway through, you better make sure you go through and make that change completely populated. And do think about how your project fits with the program. This isn't just like the hard, soft objectives, but take a look at the other stuff they funded. Um, does it seem that your game would make sense amongst the other stuff in on the CMF's page? Does it seem like this is the same sort of project that fits amongst your what the publisher does? And that's actually a pretty good one. If you take a look at like a publisher who's gone, hey, they tend to do free to play mobile games. They're probably not going to be too interested in your super premium, very expensive kind of next gen action title. Likewise, if you have a publisher that seems very much focused on kind of story driven, engaging content, they're maybe not going to be that interested in your free to play mobile game. So understand how you fit, not just, and that speaks to like the actual objectives and some ones, but how would you look up on that board of this? And then, end of the day, do tell a compelling and memorable story. Have that reviewer or the panel of reviewers who've gone through go, oh yeah, that is pretty cool. I see how that fits. I understand it. I understand how it aligns to what I'm looking for. Yeah, yeah, that's what I want. Then on the don'ts, don't underestimate the time it takes. These can be huge. There can be really good business value in doing it. There can be a lot of good tertiary value in doing it. Us applying to CMF also helped us wrap our brains around a project that we want to build and we want to take to publishers. We want to make it a thing. But it takes time, and there's some huge opportunity costs potentially. Be aware. Don't assume you have it all in your head. It's really easy, especially for us to go, hey, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write this out because I know all these things. There's a lot of research, some of that more obvious, like the market research, but some of it you might need to do some digging, do some soul searching, do some talking to people. So don't just assume that you got everything you need. Uh, don't ignore the grant instructions. If if they require something by a file name or require certain deliverables, give them that. Give them exactly that, and don't screw it. Like CMF has the supplementary materials. Don't go, oh, I ran out of space on my innovation document, so here's a supplementary material for like innovation document part two. They're not going to like that. The supplementary materials is for videos or a demonstration of a thing or something like that. So just, yeah, don't ignore the instructions. They're telling you exactly what they you need in order for them to consider you. Uh, don't assume your reader already understands your project. That's a big one. And this can be really hard, especially in games, and especially when whoever's doing the reviewing might not be a gamer. Uh, this is yeah, this can be a problem, and you want to make sure that it's really clear. I always like to use the "Does my mom understand this?" test. In fact, I literally had her read over the our pitch for the Tragic Kingdom, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I don't play games, but I kind of get what you're doing with this, and this is really cool, and yeah, I understand that." And if she, that's actually a pretty good test, and because you know what, if they don't get something, they're not asking you questions. So if they're like, "Oh yeah, not sure what's different about that. I don't really see how that's innovative." They're not going to call you up and go, hey, can you clarify this point? They're going to be, yeah, it's not innovative. I'm going to application number two, and you're going to get bumped. And on a related one, don't assume a minimum knowledge from the reader, but don't be patronizing. So this is kind of that weird balance. So you don't. I've seen a lot of applications where like the market research, like the video game industry is so many $1 billion globally, and if we were to blah blah blah, and it's so boilerplate. It's kind of like the classic like Webster's dictionary defines word as blah blah blah. Like it's like you can be really they know that you don't have to define some of that, but you're going to be it's like okay, let me talk about how I'm going to subvert the Metroidvania genre. Well, the business analyst reading this, who's an accountant and really focused on the financials, might not have any idea what Metroidvania means. So limited space, consider how you can communicate that as a reinforcement without being patronizing. And sometimes it can be really useful if there's different ways to interpret something. So it's useful. It's like when I'm saying Metroidvania, I mean this, this, and this. This is how we're going to subvert it. Be kind of useful. Uh, don't skip questions or deliverables, including kind of the soft stuff. If they're like under your innovation, show us this, 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 and technical uncertainty. Yeah, those should be your headings. You should speak to those explicitly. If you have holes, those holes will sink your application. And don't bend the truth. Or worse, right? Like it's a one, it's a lot easier to be consistent if it's just factual and honest. And two, that's a really good way to get both failed an application and be blacklisted. And it's you don't need to bend the truth. If your project is not honestly that innovative, but you feel that it's an important story, like it's Vanheim but in Canada, and we're not doing anything different, but we're just focusing on the Canadian culture. You know what? There's probably programs that would be entirely appropriate for. Don't try and present that this is the most innovative idea that's advancing the state of the art for computer science, right? So yeah, don't bend the truth. The flip side of that is it is a persuasive writing exercise, so don't negotiate against yourself. Don't undermine your application. Don't go, oh well, it's just another Metroidvania game. Everything we'd consider has been done before. When you're actually doing something cool, but be honest, be focused about it. And then like skills. So really consider the skills for actually going through an application like this. Time, resources, this takes real effort. This takes real project planning and follow through. I'd argue that doing just completing a successful CMF application on par with like doing a small indie like project. There's a lot of documents, a lot of moving parts. You need good writing skills. Ideally, if it's not just web portal stuff, you need some good layout, graphic design skills, really good attention to detail. A lot of points here, and like if you have that checklist of here's 1,000 review, edit, proofreading, repeat skills. Like this is fundamentally a writing project. Knowing where and like when and where to bring in external help. Like that's key. And so like if you're not that great on the writing side, well, maybe bring in someone who specializes in grant writing. They exist. They're excellent. And then at the end of the day, make a business decision. Should you apply? There's opportunity cost. There's potential real gain in some of these programs, but yeah, consider it's a business decision and fun to make games, but at some point it really does become. So that's pretty much my talk. Thank you for watching. Just before I take questions for follow up, I'm more than happy to talk afterwards one on one as well. You can reach out to me. My email andrewczarnietzki@gmail.com. You can find out about my current project here at curvespacegame.com. There's some links to. Oh, the video is flickering over here. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Offering. That's on my side. That was weird. I have the stream kind of going over here, and it just started to go absolutely crazy. So hopefully this is still streaming and still going out, and my internet didn't totally explode. But yeah, you can find my current project, curvespacegame.com. Only by midnight. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Like, subscribe, all those things. Would love for you to check out CurveSpace and maybe consider giving that a wish list. And then on that outside help one, consider like my mentor in that space through like CICG, campusinnovation.ca. Give them a shout out. And otherwise, I'm happy.